Anyway, we've got him back on, Jonathan Bell. Jonathan, welcome aboard. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
I'm doing fabulous. Thanks for asking. Of course, there's two issues you're coming on today to talk about. One of them, of course, is federal employees taking the Fifth Amendment. Give us your take on it. And of course, it's highlighted by Lois Lerner in the IRS scandal.
Well, first of all, thanks again for having me on your show. I think this is the second time I'm on, so thank you for that. So,
sure.
As far as federal employees are concerned, just like every other citizen of this country, they have the right to plead the Fifth. Now, if they're still employed by an agency and they're under investigation, they can plead the Fifth, but they will be subjected to some administrative discipline, which usually is termination. So they will get fired from their job. They can't be protected from that. They just can't be forced to testify under oath when there's some criminality or potential criminality involved.
Oh, that's interesting, Jonathan. So in other words, pleading the Fifth, there's no First Amendment right there that you can claim to your employee. Listen, I'm just exercising my First Amendment right to express myself by basically not saying anything. That there's no protection there for somebody.
Yeah, and it's kind of like what you were saying. Criminal-wise, they could do it. But as far as administrative investigations into potential misconduct, that could also be a specification or charge brought against them for not cooperating in an investigation. So they could very well lose their job. This is not a carte blanche thing where they could just say, I plead the Fifth, now leave me alone and let me get back to my job.
Now, is this just government employees, or is this any employee?
This is any employee, and I understand this case, why it's highlighted, but I mean, listen, they're civilians like the rest of us, and they have a right to plead the Fifth. To the extent they want her to testify. I mean, to be honest with you, if I was her lawyer, I would have her do the same thing.
I know. That's. I've heard every single high-powered attorney say the same thing. As her counsel, right. I would advise her to do the same thing.
Right.
And that's.
It's either granted. I mean, if they granted her immunity, then she could testify to whatever they want.
Yeah.
If there is no immunity, then they can't force her to testify. They just like any other potential criminal matter, they have to subpoena documents, which I understand hundreds of thousands of documents, including emails from the IRS, was given to Congress, and they have to try to potentially build a case and do their investigation. It's the Fifth Amendment. It's the Bill of Rights. It's the Constitution. What are you going to do? It applies to everybody.
Yeah, I hear you there. But, one of the things that just stinks about it, and I was talking about this before you came on, it's, if we built this justice system, and justice is the essence of justice is getting to the truth. I mean, that's what it's for. And how can you get, and one way of getting to the truth is if somebody's accused of doing something wrong, improper, illegal, an act against society, then you know what? That person should be held, you stand there, these are your accusations against you, now defend yourself. And if all you're going to do is stand there and say, you know what, I'm taking the Fifth, I have a right to just remain silent and not say anything to my accuser, then they sit there, then the accusations just keep on flying at the person. What happens as far as a judge is concerned, just for the audience to understand this, now this is an administrative proceeding here. There's no judge involved, is there, with the Lois Lerner situation?
There's no judge involved. However, there can be. Essentially, if Congress wants to impose any type of sanctions, they would have to get a House vote, and then they would have to turn it over to the AUSA Attorney's Office, and then after that they'd have to get a grand jury together, indict. Then there would be a trial with a judge and ultimately a jury, and then appeals. So technically, for any type of congressional contempt, you're looking years and years down the road. But I think that a lot of this is political acting. I mean, obviously they know that she's not going to testify without immunity. So if they really feel like there's no criminality involved, then they got to give her immunity. If they feel like there is potential for criminality, then they can't expect her and threaten her with these contempts because this is her right as a U.S. citizen.
Well, don't you?
Listen, this rule applies to everybody.
No, I understand that
in every situation.
I understand that, but don't you think that they wouldn't be doing this if they don't? You bring up the point that they must have some belief that she's not guilty of something, or else they wouldn't make a charade of it. But on the flip side of that, they wouldn't be keeping on asking her to testify and to speak about these allegations if they didn't think that she actually did something, and hoping that she eventually is going to be so embarrassed that she'll talk about, whatever happened.
Right, but there's also been some speculation that apparently she's given a lot of testimony to the Department of Justice, and there are other reasons that you plead the Fifth. I mean, sometimes it's a matter of, maybe she didn't do anything wrong. Maybe, I'm not saying she didn't, but maybe she didn't do anything wrong, but she's afraid she's going to contradict some prior testimony she gave to the Department of Justice, and she doesn't want to be brought up on charges for something as little as that. So there are other reasons, but on the same token, I mean, what does pleading the Fifth essentially mean? I mean, when you hear someone's plead the Fifth, what's your natural instinct? That the person did something wrong.
That's right. Generally speaking,
I don't think that anyone really gets out scot-free on pleading the Fifth, in my opinion.
Well, so far she's doing all right, don't you think?
Well, again, doing all right, but then there's public perception. Look what all the people think of her, and think of her pleading the Fifth and jumping to conclusions about what was really done and what was intentional and things of that nature. So, there's also the court of public policy. She has to go out and live her life, and there's a lot of people speaking negatively about her, and
well,
maybe some of it's warranted and maybe some of it's unwarranted.
Well, Jonathan Bell, I'm sure she's got a nice pension. Did she step down on her own accord, or did she get fired?
I believe she did a voluntary resignation. I think she saw the writing on the wall and took a voluntary resignation.
Right, which basically, and correct me if I'm wrong, probably protects her pension.
It does protect her pension.
That's another crazy thing about the whole system. I mean, I'm sick and tired of these people committing crimes, and just by the sheer fact that before the judge comes to town and before the sheriff takes me away and locks me up, I'm going to step down, hand in my resignation so I lock in my pension. And in fact, we covered this issue yesterday, Jonathan, on the program. There's an assemblyman up in Albany that's fighting for some new legislation that basically says if a public official, if any government employee commits a felony, then they risk losing their entire pension. And hopefully it's going to be grandfathered in. It's just absurd to me that the system, that the people would allow this to happen. That, why is it that we, and this alludes to another point that I was making just before you got on the program, is it seems as though the system has evolved into this great gargantuan, perplexing, revolving door, system of protecting the guilty more than it protects the innocent.
I'm not 100% disagreeing with you, but on the same token, she did speak. Apparently, she did speak with the Department of Justice, and
I heard.
No criminality. Everybody's innocent until proven guilty.
Now, let me ask you this, Jonathan. I'm sorry.
Just one more note on that.
Go ahead.
You know how many people in this country are wrongfully convicted, where they will finally, because of some type of DA evidence, they get out after serving like a 20-year term? I mean, it happens. So those protections sometimes are very important. I mean, you have to make laws and rules, and you have to fit every single case under them. So you can't just look at one particular case and say it doesn't fit here because it wasn't meant for one particular case. It's meant for all cases.
I concede that some people are innocently convicted. And I believe in the laws according to Gomez. What I would do if I was the emperor, I would say if any law enforcement official screws around with the evidence and wrongly brings in a person, and this has happened before. Obviously, we've seen movies on it. There's case evidences where they've fooled with the evidence. They didn't present all the evidence, and they knew. Actually, sometimes these police officers and law enforcement officials, they know that the person's innocent, but just to save face, they railroad the person anyway. Mm-hmm. I say if it's found out that person's actually innocent, then every scumbag law enforcement officer that was responsible for nailing this person, they get sentenced to the criminal act that those people got. So that's how I would solve that problem. You won't see any more.
And this time I agree with you 100%. No reservations there.
I mean, that's just when I take law enforcement very, very seriously, and I support the law enforcement officials very, very, very much because I believe that the overwhelming majority of them risk their lives every single day to protect my life and my family's life. But then, there's rotten apples in every bunch. In every barrel.
I'm a big supporter of law enforcement as well.
Yeah.
I represent a lot of federal air marshals here in the New York office and across the country, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. But unfortunately, sometimes there are bad apples, and you got to weed them out. The problem really comes with covering up. There are sometimes good people who feel pressured to cover up for the mistakes that other people make.
Yeah, it's often the case. I mean, look at Nixon. It's not in what actually happened. It's the cover up.
Right.
But anyway, getting back to the Lois Lerner situation, I understand, and you mentioned it a few times, that apparently she did speak to the Department of Justice. Now, can the Department of Justice be compelled to give over those interviews?
That's a good question. I don't know that I know the answer to that. I know that I recognize if a judge signs off on a subpoena, but to be honest with you, I haven't seen that before, so I don't want to definitively tell you. I mean, there's probably some protections that I guarantee it's probably difficult, and if they do get anything, it'll probably be heavily redacted, but I don't know that they can get it, to be honest with you.
Now, the public has been listening as they've heard from time to time the Lois Lerner situation and the scandal. You hear these terms, court order and being held in contempt. First of all, can you talk a little bit about the court order? In other words, Lois Lerner was given a court order to appear. Is that right? I mean, how give us a rundown on those two terms.
Yeah, a court order could certainly compel somebody to appear, and by going and appearing, she's cooperating with the court order. However, that doesn't force her to self-incriminate herself. So she could appear and then plead the fifth. As far as contempt, as I stated before, the problem with contempt is it's going to take years to get resolved. Again, between the House vote and then going to the U.S. Attorney's Office and jumping through all those loops and potential appeals, before it even gets resolved, years are going to pass. And again, I just don't think that anyone is going to really fully support contempt when someone's concerned about their Fifth Amendment rights and they opt to plead the fifth. So I don't think that really is going to hold much weight. And my understanding is that Congress, other than making threats, hasn't taken any action to see the contempt proceedings through.
Folks, joining us on the Newsmaker line, Jonathan Bell. He's a federal employment attorney, talking a little bit about the Lois Lerner incident, talking about a federal employee or a government employee pleading the Fifth Amendment, thereby not having to say basically anything. And, I mean, one thing that's troubling here, Jonathan, and I think is troubling to the American people, is, it's bad enough we're afraid of the IRS just doing what they're there to do. But then when you add on and lump on this whole other alleged activity that they were doing, and I think they've got enough evidence that shows that the IRS was targeting conservative groups across the country during an election year, I mean, that is just troubling. Just knowing as an American citizen how overpowering the IRS is. I mean, when you get a letter from the IRS, you cringe. You almost don't want to open it up.
Sure.
But when you're faced with these type of facts and evidence that I think shows, I mean, of course, Obama says there's not a smidgen of evidence that any wrongdoing happened, but I think there's plenty of evidence. There's groups that have come out with records that clearly demonstrate that they were targeted. Now, what's troubling, I think, to the American people is here we are, the greatest justice system in the world, and we can't do anything about it. Forget about Lois Lerner for a second. Let's just get to those people who are responsible for the targeting.
Right, and I agree with you. I mean, you look at the stats alone, and when you learn 100% of the audits were for right-wing affiliates, then that's undeniable.
Yeah.
And I don't know what, if anything, they're going to do with that. I mean, it certainly was shocking to me.
I'll tell you something. If they don't get their act together and do something, I think little by little people's confidence in the government is just slipping away. And being in New York, even our local governments are slipping away from us. It's really we live in strange times, quite frankly, Jonathan, in my opinion. But anyway, coming up after the break, Jonathan, we're going to talk about Senator Marco Rubio's announced proposed legislation, talking about how more government or federal employees should be hired without a traditional college degree, which I'm kind of in favor for. I'd like to get your take on it, Jonathan. And